Much for all of the attendees coming in there. We're going to start today's webinar, so welcome to the session for managed service providers. We're going to be talking about how you can survive and thrive through the challenging circumstances that we're facing at the moment. At the end of this hour, we want you to understand more about changes in trends in the MSP space, how customer requirements are changing due to COVID, and then we're going to leave you with some ideas of how you can thrive in today's climate. So my name is Jake Third. I'm going to be your host for today. And I'm going to be joined by Reeves, the CEO of a leading MSP, Conosco, Roxanne Brownlee from Google, and Julio Taylor, the creative director from Hallam. I'm going to share my screen with you and we can get started. So you now should be able to see that screen. Can you see the housekeeping screen? We're good to go. Okay, so the first thing to say is, if you could please turn your chat function on. We want this webinar to be as interactive as possible. We're going to be having a Q&A session during the webinar. So please ask questions as we go along. Anders will be happy to answer, so will Roxanne, and we can jump in at any time. Now, what we wanted to do was start this webinar with a quick poll. We want to understand where you guys are right now. So the poll question is going to be, in response to the pandemic, what are your current plans for sales and marketing investment? So are you going to be decreasing your investment in sales and marketing? Are you remaining the same? Are you increasing spend? Are you not yet sure? Are you sat on the fence? So I'm going to launch that poll. So you now should be able to see a poll on your screen for you to participate in. Questions being, are you decreasing spend, keeping spend the same, increasing spend, and not yet sure? And for those who are getting the recording of this sent out, at the end of the webinar, we'll be sending a file copy of this video out to everybody who's participated. And what's happening on the screen right now that you may not be able to see is people are voting on, are they going to be increasing spend, decreasing spend, or the same? And there we go. Let's see the results. Sharing the results now. So you should be able to see on your screen the results that we've shared. So for the people who are only able to listen, in response to the question, what are your plans for sales and marketing investment as an MSP right now? We have 18% of people looking to decrease spend. We have 24% of people whose spend is remaining the same. We have 35% of people who are actually increasing spend, and 24% of people unsure, that sat on the fence. So the winner there is people increasing spend. So what we're seeing is that the majority of MSPs are looking at increasing spend right now. So that's a useful poll to get this started and to take a temperature of everybody in the room. So now what I'm going to do is go directly into our first conversation. That's going to be with Anders. So Anders is the leader of an MSP. He's going to be talking about his experience during COVID. Anders Reeves believes in the importance of radical candor and that nobody is more important than his teammates. And a fun fact about Anders for you, he's now the leader of a company that he once fired. So we're going to open up with a conversation with Anders and what does success look like during this pandemic. So Anders, that's a bit of a crazy story for you there, firing the company that you're now leading. So could you just tell us a bit more about that story and a bit about your background?
Yeah, certainly. So the firing was certainly for honourable reasons, I would say. A very long story short. I joined Moonpig.com from Sony PlayStation back in 2014. And by that time, Moonpig was a grumpy teenager of a business. It had retained this fantastic, fast-paced startup mentality. But the group board were looking to prepare it to refinance and effectively sell to private equity. They had a new CTO who joined alongside me and believed that to enhance value and to pass more simply through the M&A due diligence, actually internalizing the IT and the intellectual property behind the management of that platform would be beneficial. So whilst Conosco had grown up alongside Moonpig and supported them to those levels of success that we saw in the mid 2010s to 2020s, the decision was that we need to in-house this. So I was hired to build that internal IT team, and Conosco did a fantastic job of transitioning to me. I did it very transparently with the MD of Conosco at the time in full knowledge. We got them through some really stringent security maturity deliverables that the board wanted to see. And then we said goodbye. And I think the transparency and the candor, I think, and the openness with which we both maintained that working relationship, then saw the Conosco board approach me about 4 years later and say, look, we love what you did with the Photobox group and how you kind of grew its capability and its digital maturity. Perhaps you could help us work on redefining what Conosco as an MSP does for its next 15 years. And so I joined it a couple of years ago now, and it's been a crazy ride so far, but just a fantastic one.
I think it's a testimony to your character there, Anders, that you can fire a company with so much grace and candor that they remember you in the long term. So that's excellent. And I guess to start off the conversation, I'd like to start by asking a really broad question, if that's okay. Could you just talk to us a little bit about the kind of changes you've seen in your business, you've seen in Conosco, due to COVID, due to the lockdown, the current circumstances? What's that been like for you and for Conosco overall?
It's a really good question, and I think part of the DNA of our group is one born where we effectively have 50% of headcount in Europe, in London, and 50% in South Africa. And so we're used to working at distance from one another. We're also ISO 27001 compliant, so we've got very capable DR, business continuity plan run books that we've exercised often over the years. So we took the proactive step a couple of weeks prior to lockdown in both the UK and South Africa to enact BCP and send staff to work remotely. We knew there'd be always a few loose ends to tidy up. And there were. In South Africa, we certainly saw rolling power outages, comms fluctuation, and our operations team did a brilliant job of just getting everybody up and running. So I would say that in terms of service delivery, we've maintained exactly the same level of service for our clients. We've utilized the same tools that we sell our clients, Slack, Teams, RingCentral, Zoom, etc. And I think, if anything, one of the things I would comment on is that it's actually brought us closer together. Those platforms especially, which typically keep us glued to our seats in the day-to-day, have actually allowed us to interact far more. And so we're having more regular management meetings now. And I would say that on the whole, we're performing very, very well. And so it certainly hasn't been, I think, some of the panic that we've seen in broader industry where they've suddenly had to react to not being able to get to their offices.
So you say overall there's been less panic. You have been better set up to deal with the transition to remote working. You mentioned there that in fact your cadence for your management meetings has actually increased, and you stay closer to one another as a team. Now, shortly we're going to be bringing in Roxanne from Google, and Google's got some really interesting insights into how people's search behaviour has changed within this particular vertical. But I'd like to hear from you, Anders, about what changes have you seen in demands from your customers in regards to your different service areas, different product areas? What kind of changes in customer demand have you seen?
I think the headline for us would be that those projects that clients once saw as nice to haves, so potentially security work or large scale project delivery, is now getting their attention. And I think part of that is because they have resource within their own businesses to support appraising those proposals that were put forward. And actually supporting us in delivering them. So we're seeing a great uptick in our cyber team, our Advantage team, which is our sort of virtual CIO offering, but also things around unified comms, which are perhaps more obvious, mobile device management, where you've got that sort of BYOD approach that needs to have security focused around it. So I would certainly say BAU has taken more of a back seat, and those nice meaty transformative projects are now really coming forward. And we've had record quarters now for our security division and our professional services team as a result.
And I do wonder whether that record quarter is something that has been seen across various different MSPs, or whether that is something that you're doing that's slightly different there. And again, I know when we bring Google in, we have seen a spike in demand across the board for these products and services. It's interesting because it very much seems to me at the moment like people are doubling down with their existing suppliers. The people who may have been looking to change suppliers beforehand are looking at right now and thinking, maybe it's not the time to go out to market and find somebody new. So I wonder what you've experienced in terms of new business. Is that true? Have you been able to win new business, say in the last 6 weeks? If you could talk a little bit about that.
I would certainly be open and honest with those on the call to say it's been a mixed experience. We have won new business in the last 6 weeks. We've seen conversations where we were certainly far down the road being kicked out further. We have seen tenders being delayed now until late summer. Where we had won business around or just prior to lockdown, That has been delivered, and so where we are displacing an incumbent MSP, they've continued and said, yeah, let's go ahead. Our comms division is the interesting one, because I think our mobile and our fixed line offering is now of interest, because people are seeing, okay, we need unified comms, we need data on the move, etc. But I wouldn't pretend that we were seeing a huge surge in net new business. I think people are being more cautious.
Yeah, and it's certainly understandable that people are being more cautious. And one of the things that we've been interested in from a marketing point of view is that if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, people at the moment are very much at that base level where they need that reassurance, they need that safety, and sometimes it's better the devil that you know, which transitions just nicely really into marketing and how we're communicating both with customers, but also how we're communicating in marketing messaging. Could you talk a little bit about marketing strategy, comms, messaging? Have you pivoted that at all? I'd be interested to hear about that.
I would certainly say that we've been even more proactive in reaching out to our existing base. I think it's important to say, we're here and we're still viable. It also acts as a good sense check commercially for us to ensure that our clients are also not struggling. But equally, if they are, going back to the partnership side of how we approach our clients, actually simply reaching out and saying, look, we appreciate that you might be in retail or hospitality. How can we help right now? Is going down very well. I think it's bonding us even closer together and is opening up further opportunities. So certainly that proactive reach is important. I think secondarily, going to the cold prospecting market, the push for cyber services, risk is a key one right now, whether it's cyber risk or more around general business continuity, is something that we certainly have explored for a number of months and are really just continuing to push right now.
And I know in a separate conversation that we've had, Anders, you've mentioned that your account team, you don't very much have sort of salespeople and things like that. They're experts in what they do. So they're well positioned to have deep conversations with your client base, reassuring them, talking about the future of their business. And that is probably a key part of the success that you've had. So wonderful. Anders, you'll be staying on the line and we'll be having a panel discussion at the end. For any of the other MSPs or guests that we've got currently, there is a Q&A section and a chat section of this. Put any questions that you'd like to pose to Anders or any of the other people we've got on the panel into that section. And when we get to Q&A at the end, we can make sure that we ask your questions. I'm just going to transition now to speak to Roxanne Brownlee. So Roxanne's a senior agency development manager at Google. And every time I speak to Roxanne, it gets more and more fascinating. And I think one of the main reasons for that is because she has actually got a training as a neuroscientist as well as what she does at Google. So Roxanne believes that having an understanding of human behavior helps you to make decisions, both looking at psychology and looking at data. And she's keen to help businesses to adapt to any changing situation. Today, what Roxanne is going to be discussing is changes in the B2B space, changes in people's search behavior that they're seeing at Google, and the implications that these have both for businesses and for individuals. So Roxanne, I'll pass over to you and let you go through your information.
Great, thank you, Jake. And it's great to be on a webinar. You're definitely appealing to my interest when you start spelling out things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So, appreciate that. As Jake mentioned, I'm going to be going into some of the behavioral data and changes that we've seen in light of the disruption that we're facing at the moment. And I'm an expert in data. I love data. And I think when it comes to data, it's easier to show than tell. So I have made a few slides to take you guys through. So let me see if I can get screen share working and we can dive right in. And yeah, basically what I wanted to share with you guys is, what are the changes that we're seeing in the environment? How are consumers and businesses evolving in light of in light of the pandemic, in light of what's been going on at the moment? And I wanted to start this off with a quote that I've pulled from a very recent eConsultancy article, which is called "Why the Lockdown is Driving Demand for B2B Marketing Software and Tech." So it was just a couple of days ago, and I think it leans into what Anders was describing earlier when he says that some of these projects that had previously been put on the back foot, clients are looking to address them now and kind of adapt a little bit more quickly. So the quote that I pulled out from this article is, "Technology should no longer be viewed as an added bonus when it comes to your business. in the current climate, B2B organizations are adapting to an entirely online approach. And I think that that's very much what we're seeing. Whereas, if we were dealing with businesses that were very stable in their predominantly offline ways of working, that's been hugely disrupted. And they've been faced with a situation that in order to thrive or even just survive, they have to become much more online first because they don't really have any other option right now. So technology, of course, is a huge part of the evolution from offline to online, and that's where a lot of MSPs come in. So some of the data that we have supporting that is we've seen in the past month that searches for something as basic, so we're talking about Maslow hierarchy of needs, like very, very basic, they're just going online is something that's been surging. So these are people who they never really would have thought about it before, but they're realizing very quickly that right now they need to be online and they don't know how to do that. So they're looking for as much assistance with that process as possible. And you can see they see technology and IT being a huge part of that. So over on the right, you'll see that in the last 7 days, there's been a surge in interest for searches like future technology, assistive technology, and importance of information technology. They're trying to figure out this space. They've never really dealt with this before. A lot of people who would have run their businesses predominantly in an offline world. And we know just how unfamiliar they are with it because we see increases in searches for up to 200% their increase in searches for hardware definition, software definition, examples of hardware, examples of software. They don't even know what these things are. So they barely even know what the problem they're solving is, but they just know they need to be online and they need to be online now in order to have business continuity in this environment. And we can see some of the ways that they're evolving their work down here in the bottom left corner. So searches related to the term work. When we look at the month of April, they want to know how Zoom works. They're trying to figure out how to do what they would have done face-to-face and do that online. So of course, we're seeing similar providers step into the space and assist them. And then how does Skype work? You'll see there. How does click and collect work? They're learning how to do things digitally very, very quickly, which they've not had to consider and they've not had to do before. And then, of course, the services and the products that they're relying on, the upticks that we're seeing are in those products and services that enable them to function entirely from home. So it'll come as no surprise that Zoom has been massively on the rise since the start of the pandemic. Same with Google Classroom, Microsoft Teams, Hangouts. We're using the technologies and the services that can help us do what we would have done offline online. And there's so much of that in the B2B space when businesses have had to move very aggressively to a fully online model and think about how they can have business as usual as much as possible with their teams and with their customers. It's not all work though. We know that increasingly, in light of what's been going on, people are relying on digital to entertain them. So we've seen since the start of the lockdown in the UK, that in the past 28 days, watch time on YouTube has been up 27%. People watch a huge amount of content on YouTube as it is. The average person in the UK watches an hour a day of content, and there's over 1 billion hours of content consumed every single day. So for that number to go up by 27%, that's a really steep rise for an already large platform. And we're seeing them embed YouTube more into their home devices as well, in a way that they would have watched television. So watch time on TV screens has increased at an even faster pace than watch time on mobile devices or on desktop devices. So we're seeing YouTube becoming much more incorporated into the home as people spend more time at home. And what they're doing on YouTube, so I can look into some of the audience behavioral signals here and see that those who are expressing an interest in information technology, now they're increasingly consuming video content to help them build the capabilities they need. So content related to IT skills and education, but also keeping a finger on the pulse with news. So we can see that some of the top channels that this audience is watching are Guardian News, The Telegraph, Sky News, BBC News, and that the categories that they tend to over-index on, they watch significantly more than the UK internet average. These are related to their areas of expertise or the problem they need to solve. So looking at YouTube videos on data formats and protocols, computer education, developer tools, cloud storage, they're basically trying to rebuild their lives digitally and learn as much as they can through YouTube. And it could be reading reviews or not reading, watching video reviews of services or providers that they're interested in working with. Now, okay, and to you know, I found this one quite fun when I was looking at the specific search terms within the information technology category, and the biggest rise year on year has come from contingency plan template, and that's been up almost 800% year over year. And what that's telling us is that businesses that have been struck with adversity in this changing environment, they're thinking, okay, I have to think about the long term. How do I plan ahead? Let's not actually just take this every single, like, day by day. Let's build a contingency plan so we're deciding how we're going to move forward. And that's a huge surge. It's up, you know, 800% year on year is absolutely massive. And we can see some of the trends that surround this, like what is AI? That's up almost 100% year over year. So they're doing this, they're building these contingency plans, and they're trying to figure out, how can machine learning help me with this? Because this maybe isn't an area that's familiar to them. And then when we look at the top searches in the information technology category, the top search, the term that's searched for most frequently is website developer, but that itself is up 760% year over year, which is huge. So the top movers in the category, they don't tend to move in, you know, double or triple digit numbers. But that just shows you the really, really pressing demand for this area. You have people who maybe didn't even have a website before because they didn't need it or they didn't prioritize it. But in light of needing to have a fully online business and have one very, very quickly, there's been a lot of demand here, and services that will help them manage their websites and their business have been following and will continue to follow suit in this environment. So yeah, just highlighting the contingency plan template there, website developer, what is AI? So what can you do about it? Just some tips to take away for how to respond in the changing environment. I think Anders mentioned it earlier when he mentioned these calling customers, seeing how they're feeling, seeing what he can do for them. We definitely recommend that as well. You know, needs are evolving right now, so be as helpful as you can. Be a helping brand. And the reason why is that your customers may have changed, that the people who are searching now, their needs may be different, their needs may be more basic than you think. For instance, you might have the most sophisticated algorithm on the market, but if your new customer who's new to this area, new to this service, if they don't know what an algorithm is, they're not going to care. So think about your messaging as well. Give them credible, detailed information, and think about how your value proposition might need to change in light of the current environment. And of course, how can you communicate with sensitivity? Also, communities are increasingly important as we're a lot of people in quarantine. We're spending a lot more time at home. Think about how you can align your brands to create connections among your customers and forge new communities. And then the third point is, as we move to an increasingly digital world, we're not really on the 9 to 5 cycle anymore. So digital is 24/7, and you have to think about how can you meet your customers where they are online and when they're online. So making that pivot for 24/7 businesses is possible and beneficial in these changing times. And as well, in terms of your marketing, pivot to platforms and formats that make sense for people who are staying at home. So for instance, could you do something to put an ad in front of a user while they're watching YouTube on their home screen now, if we know that that's a big uptick for them in a category that, of course, is interesting and relevant to them for the problems they're facing at this time. So that's everything. I hope you guys, that was useful or insightful for you. And if you have any questions, drop them in the chat box and hopefully I can address them at the end.
Cool, thank you very much for that, Roxanne. So just a couple of the thoughts there from what you said. The first of all is, you said that there were 1 billion hours of watch time of video content a day, which I think is crazy, and that's up 27%, so that's a massive increase. A few of the things that I picked out based on what you were saying is there's this need to go remote and to enable remote working. And Anders, I'm not going to ask you to come in right now, but one of the questions has been asked in the Q&A, and I want to give you plenty of time to think about this so that you can offer your response slightly later, is this sudden drive for UC, for unified communications, and the sudden need for that, is there a risk there that the MSP could be cut out of that, and that customers could actually go and research that themselves and get themselves set up without the intermediary of using an MSP? So that's one for you to think about when we move into the Q&A section. But Roxanne, I found that absolutely fascinating. If anyone's got any questions for Roxanne, please do engage with the Q&A section, leave anything that you like, and we'll make sure that we pose your questions to Roxanne at the end of this. Now, we're going to move on now to speak to Julio Taylor. So Julio is the creative director of Hallam, a leading digital marketing agency that specializes in working with MSPs. Having consulted with brands like Speedo, the BBC, Jägermeister, I think one of Julio's key skills is taking that experience with B2C consumer-facing brands and taking what's best out of that and making it available to B2B businesses. But what Julio believes in is that purpose-driven connections and having really powerful creative is at the heart of what successful B2B marketing is. So I'd like to have a bit of a chat with Julio. And I guess to open it up, Julio, I know you're working with Conosco at the moment to help with their marketing. Could you tell us a little bit about how you're working with Conosco, and maybe just what can other MSPs take out of the kind of work that you've been doing?
Yeah, sure. So actually, before you mentioned earlier about my experience working in B2C, for example, working with brands like Speedo, Jägermeister, who have recently, over the last 5 years or so, been faced with the challenge of having to connect directly with consumers and cut out the middleman. I believe that the lines between B2B and B2C are so thin that actually they're sort of meaningless now. I think if you can no longer really believe that because you sell to companies, you're not really dealing with the same emotional responses that people have when they buy a product for themselves. I think the decision-making processes and the way that people react to what they see is exactly the same. I would say it's actually probably more important than ever that B2B marketing people consider the person that they're marketing to, not the company that they're marketing to. So on that basis, I've been working very closely with Anders and with some of the other senior leaders at Conosco, working on trying to, what I would best describe as trying to find the untold story of Conosco. What's under the hood that customers only really discover once they begin working with them. And that untold story is the critical component that I think is going to power the way that MSPs can transition from being a middleman or a deliverer of fringe services or break fix solutions towards being a critical central component of the way that people will do business in the future, which is remote, it's instant, it's distributed, and so on. So the work that we're doing is I'm supporting the team on finding their value proposition, making sure that that's really clear, finding really succinct and powerful ways of explaining what the untold story actually is, and then eventually working on a new website and working on new ways of making sure that the brand is clear.
Yeah, you made some really interesting points there. One about the blurred lines between B2B and B2C marketing, and really it's business to human, isn't it? It's human interaction, regardless of whether you're a consumer or not. You also mentioned an interesting point there about it being a critical partnership. And I know, Anders, you've touched on this before, and maybe later in the panel discussion you'll jump in, that the term MSP is increasingly becoming redundant because it says a service provider, and service provider is by its nature transactional. And what Anders has spoke eloquently about, and you've touched on there, Julio, is this partnership is being integral to their business strategy. But building on that then, we've got a number of, I'll use the term MSPs on this call right now. What advice would you give to them about marketing during COVID, about their messaging? What do you have to say about that?
Well, actually, there was a question that came up from one of the attendees asking whether there's a risk that MSPs will be cut out of this process as people begin to research. I would say, yes, maybe there is, but I think it's more of a call to action, that actually you need to redefine what an MSP actually is. You're no longer a middleman or a box shifter or a person that answers the phone when something breaks. I think the transition that you need to make as an MSP is transition from being somebody who waits for the phone to ring when things don't work towards being a critical component of the way people do business, to become this central core component, to become this engine that powers the way that businesses operate, and that you're there not only to help them adapt, but also to preempt the way that their business is going to go, which is undoubtedly going to be remote, distributed, globalized, using an increasingly complex network of apps and things like Zoom and Google Hangouts and all this kind of stuff, how it all works together. Somebody has to make the stuff work. And even though we're dealing with increasingly tech-savvy organizations who probably know how to do this themselves, that the reality is they don't want to. And actually they're busy running their businesses, and also they need a partner who will bring them the kind of resilience and security and expertise that they know it's being done the right way. So my advice would be, take the time to really think about what is it that you actually offer. It isn't really just the software and the hardware. It's more than that. Take the time to invest in making sure that your message is clear, that the that your proposition is crystal clear, that you're speaking with confidence and clarity, and that you have a website and a marketing strategy that is fit for the recovery, whatever that may look like. I would also say that whichever shape the recovery has when it finally comes, I would say that MSPs will play a critical role. Roxanne talks about the need to create connections with your customers. I think the way that people interact with brands is shifting very quickly. And also the fact that business is moving online. Some of these things are here to stay. So I think it's about becoming more than a product, more than a service, and actually becoming something that people trust, that people actually want to engage with. And I think the final point that I'll make on that also is that it's, even though there is a risk of perhaps becoming obsolete, it's also a great big opportunity to become an MSP of the future. But it is also going to be an arms race. It's going to be a competitive space where people are going to invest. Smart companies will build new websites during the quiet times. They will build brands. They will build campaigns. And you need to be ready to cut through the noise when this stuff settles down and we enter this new normal. You have to be prepared for that. And I think unless you're authentic and you have a personality and you have something special to offer that is really more than just your product and your service, I think you will then become obsolete. I think that's the best summary that I can give.
No, you made some really great points there. And I think that's a nice note to end on as we transition into more of the panel discussion. And I think in terms of some of the things you were saying, that initially when people moved into this remote working time, when lockdown happened, people were feeling at risk, people were feeling afraid, long-term decisions may have been put on the back burner. And as we're moving out of that, people are thinking about the long term again. And the investments and changes you make in your marketing are going to be what determines, is your business going to pick up and succeed when we come out of this lockdown? Now, that's a great contribution, Julio. Thank you for that. We're going to move now into the panel discussion, and I think we can move fairly seamlessly into that, because I believe, Anders, you unmiked yourself during Julio's points, and yeah. I think I sense that you can build on some of the things that Julio was saying there. So maybe to start the panel discussion, maybe you could kick us off, Anders, with what's on your mind.
I think I would build on what Julio has said. I think we have a few core tenets within our business that I use as real accelerants to our thinking, and one of those is very provocative, and I would encourage all MSPs to think in this way. But imagine that support is dead. Technology is becoming simpler to use at the user level, and assume that recurring revenue isn't going to exist there in the next 2.5 to 5 years. So that's something that keeps us very focused on future growth and ensuring that with our teams, we invest in training and capability always. Because our belief is if you stand still and just focus on the BAU, which is really what support is about, you're really sliding backwards in terms of what you're able to offer the market. I think the other term, and I think you mentioned this yourself, Jake, is that the term MSP, I think, is a very legacy term. And certainly when I started at Conosco, my very open statement to staff was, if in 5 years we still consider ourselves to be an MSP, I failed. It is a subservient, legacy, fairly low-tech term, I think, that is used these days. And I think there's far more value to be delivered and derived from being in partnership with clients. So again, going back to what Julio said, if you're not using this time to train up your staff, and staff being the key here, it's the skill set can be applied to great people, right? Go out and go and find really well-skilled people that don't fit your culture, and that's a great big miss. So hold on to your people as as dearly as you possibly can. I think the third position for us is, along with support, we believe that the CTO is dead, and that's why we don't have a CTO. We have an office of the CTO, and in fact, every line of business, from security to professional services delivery to consultancy, sits on that council within Conosco. So we derive the brain power of at least 3, if not 5 people as our CTO, because we don't feel that in business, you can find a CTO that is well geared towards both software engineering and DevOps and infrastructure and security. It's a very broad hat that needs to exist. And for us, we use those three positions to really drive our innovation in the services that we then deliver as partners to clients, not as just a service provider.
And I wonder if you'd be happy to touch on this for a moment, Anders. I know we've spoken separately about a key thing about Conosco, which is around employee engagement being at the centre. And I know part of this is about the technology, part of this is about the future, but part of this is about culture and leadership. And if you could think for a moment on, how do you engage your employees? How are you using employee engagement as actually part of your marketing? Because you mentioned that you actually share that with your potential suppliers. Whilst you're having a think about that, I'm just going to mention to all participants, this section right now is the part where we can do Q&A. So if you've got any of the Q&A questions, we've got one to answer so far, which is around unified communications and cutting out the MSP. But if you've got any more questions, now's the time to ask. So just to bring it back to that point, Anders, what do you think about culture right now? What can leaders of MSPs be doing to drive culture?
I think the first thing is you need to find an effective way of measuring what the heartbeat, the cultural tone is within your organization. We use the Gallup questionnaires every quarter for that. We've done it for about 18 months now. And we democratize the results. So we currently see about 85% client staff engagement. And whenever we have results, we will publish them the next day once the leadership team have had a chance to digest. And we will, personally, I will add commentary as to what we will then commit to addressing in the next quarter. So there's a constant feedback mechanism within our organization as to how people feel and how we need to respond to better support improvements in certain areas. We do use that data when we have prospect meetings to demonstrate another, I think, legacy issue with MSPs, which is that average tenure within MSPs is very, very low. It's quite a flighty staff. And so I think ensuring that you can demonstrate we have an active and engaged and striving staff to prospects and clients, because I think it also acts as a good reassurance there, is key. I think the fact that you will typically see people jump from MSP to MSP to MSP is really a terrible message. And I think my own experience has been building teams with an average tenure of about 8 years, which in tech is quite a long time. I think we should sing about those things and build cultures where people want to not only stay but make progress. And so we use those mechanisms really within our business to enhance the culture and the buy-in and the engagement of our people.
Yeah. And two things there that you said, that Anders, I think are sort of directly actionable for people is one, having a really easy way to actually measure engagement, and then two, democratizing the results, being open and transparent with it. And I think that's really important. Now I'll just bring Julio in for a moment. So Julio, first of all, feel free to riff off anything that Anders has said there, but if I could build even further, I'd like to touch on what your thoughts are in terms of how our customers are changing due to COVID and lockdown. How are humans changing, and how can brands that are MSPs, brands like Conosco, react to that? So I'd like to bring you in on that, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think there's no question that people are going to. I said this before in a previous event that I feel like we've experienced an industrial revolution in the space of weeks. And it's been this sort of like forced growing up has happened very, very quickly, where we, for example, as an agency, always talked about, wouldn't it be great if we could do fully remote and see what it's like? And we did it. We like instantly, and it was good. It's been fine. I think what people are, what's happening with people is I think they're becoming incredibly sensitive to how effective online marketing is, because it's the only channel that's actually available to them now. And that is likely to be a new reality for some time. Those habits will stay. So I don't think that, I think as a brand, as an MSP, I don't think you can go to the post-COVID landscape with a blunt marketing message or a blunt proposition where you don't really have anything to say and expect the same results, because your customer base has changed forever. Picking up a little bit on Roxanne's comments about the habits of people in terms of video consumption, online consumption, search trends. people are changing, and and I think most of it is likely to be permanent. So I think the sentience of customers towards how genuine things are from a computer screen rather than meeting somebody face to face, if we're prepared to accept that the internet is a replacement for face-to-face business during COVID-19, then we have to be prepared for it to also be true after. And that means that your online, your messaging that you put on a computer screen or on a video ad or whatever has to be sharp, and it has to be genuine.
I think that's a really great point that you've made, Julio. And it's almost like some of these incremental changes that we were seeing before, like the move to video conferencing, the move to remote working, digital enablement, that COVID really, in a way, and the lockdown has been a catalyst to that. And those organizations.
Actually, that's a really good way of putting it. It's simply accelerated. I think we're already seeing the shift. Certainly, in my experience working with MSPs, we've seen the shift in MSPs talking about, for example, we're a Microsoft partner or whatever, towards having an added value that's bigger than the product and the service. That's already happening. But I think what's happening now is all of that thinking is now accelerated. 5 or 10 years of progress will happen in months.
Yeah.
Because everything that people are experiencing is happening through their computer screens or through their phones. For that reason, we're entering a period of almost like a golden age of like a massive awakening of the way that all brands, and I think MSPs are especially important because they are the lifeblood of business, which online, of remote business. Every company that does business online relies on an MSP in some way.
It's a great point. And we've just had one of the questions from one of the participants that I think I'd like to bring Roxanne on. And I'm going to roll 2 questions into one because they're very interlinked with one another. The direct question is, what trends do you see in search behavior that can be extrapolated out over the coming couple of years? And if you could weave into that, looking at the longer term, how do you think MSPs can be marketing themselves in that longer term? Not just this 6-week period that we're in, but the next year, so to speak. So the first question is about changes in search behavior. The second is about marketing yourself over the next 12 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So changes in search behavior. Actually, we had our earnings call as Google just last night. So Sundar was giving us some insights on that as well. But he reported that we've seen a big rise in the amount that people have been searching with Google. We've also seen a big uptick in usage of apps. We've seen a big uptick in usage of YouTube. But I think when we're talking about the long term, the question is, are these things going to sustain? I think if we bring that conversation back to psychology for a minute, I know people always say that it takes 21 days to form a habit. I'm not convinced that that's based on any real research. The most compelling research that I've read on it suggests that it's actually 66 days that it takes. So if you look at this period where behavior has changed so drastically because our environments have changed so drastically, we're going through a period of very aggressive behavior change and new habit formation. So if people get used to relying on search or YouTube or apps in a new way, and that's over a sustained period of time, then very likely we could treat that as a new habit and we could project those things to remain in the future. What Sundar called out though is, a lot of the changes that we're seeing at the moment have been based on the need to ensure business continuity. And we've seen a lot of movement from businesses to digital services, and with that increase in working online, online education, online medicine, online shopping, online entertainment. But all of these shifts are so significant and require quite a lot of resource and investment to make the shifts that we do expect these to be long-term. And, Sundar called that out himself, that we do think that when the emergency has passed, the world isn't going to look the same, and that the changes that we're seeing in these industries, we do expect them to be sustained in the long term. So what that means that we're seeing that there's an uplift in searches in those areas because there's new demand there. That's probably gonna stick around if these areas become much more solidly fixed in the online space, and consumer behaviors have changed in that way as well. When we talk about long term, I think, the question is, at the moment we're dealing with a period of economic uncertainty, and it can be tricky to figure out, well, where should I be spending my time right now? Where should I be investing? Ultimately, what we see is that in the short term, kind of like Jake, as you were saying, with the hierarchy of needs and people wanting a safety net, people think, okay, where can I get a solid return on investment? And if we look at what we learned in the last period of economic uncertainty back in 2008, we did see that people were investing in search a lot more. But I think the thing that we have to be cognizant of right now is that this is the first time that we've had a pandemic in a digital era. So if we look back on previous periods of uncertainty, we don't know if what we saw then for what played out in the short term and long term, if that's going to be the case as this is what happens now. Because in a lot of ways, it's not that consumer spending power has decreased substantially. It's just that the environment has changed so significantly that businesses have been operating in a slightly different way. Like we've seen a lot of businesses being able to do business as usual. There are some areas where there's been a semblance of normality because of the ability to work remotely, the ability to do online shopping, home entertainment, telemedicine, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, in short, what we did see, there's a wealth of data available in the IPA data bank that shows that through periods of uncertainty, those that paid attention to the long term increased or maintained their investments in advertising and thought about what it meant to build up their brand and their value proposition in the long term, which we've talked about kind of communication in a couple of different ways over the course of this webinar. Those were the businesses that after the period of the last economic downturn, they failed better and they reported significant gains in market share because they were able to effectively balance their short and long-term strategies. So if somebody is thinking about what should they do in the short term, what should they do in the long term, I definitely encourage you to look at the data that is available in the IPA data bank and make your own assessment. And then there are probably things to learn from the last downturn, but I'd also acknowledge that what we're seeing now is something that we've never seen before. Like this is the first pandemic that we faced in the digital world, so we don't know how reliable that data is going to be now and how much that's going to help us predict out into the long term. And then the last thing I'll say is that, yeah, we do expect some of the changes that we're seeing to be sustained and to be long term, like that shift in businesses becoming more online than ever, with education, particularly healthcare, medicine, remote work. Yeah, that felt very long and rambly. I hope that answered the question in bits and parts.
No, Roxanne, that was fascinating as always. I think a couple of things that I took from that. One is paying attention to the long term. This is not a time to make knee-jerk snap reactions because that could damage your long-term market position. And the second thing, which I wish we could spend more time discussing, but it's not one for now, is are leaders, in my mind, psychologically prepared for change? Because one of the things that you said was the changes that are happening now aren't necessarily short-term. These are potentially long-term changes. And how well are we prepared for that? And maybe that's why this messaging around safety and security and reassuring is so valuable, because people are psychologically in a vulnerable place due to that level of change. Now, we're going to try to end the webinar at around 12, which means we've got 6, 7 or 8 minutes left. Now, what I'd like to get into that is two things. One, in a moment, I'm going to pose the question to the panelists today. What 3 things would you say to MSPs to take away? 3 bits of advice that I want from each of you. Try to keep your answers to about 1 or 2 minutes. But before we go into those 3 bits of advice, Anders, potentially, and Roxanne, could you just mute your mic? It's causing an echo. Anders, I'd just like to go to you for a moment. There was a question that was mentioned a moment ago around UC, Unified Communications, and that this increase in demand of people researching, can they do it themselves? Is there a risk that the MSP could be cut out of that process? So if you could answer that question first, that'd be great.
The one-word answer to that is there is absolutely a risk, yes. And for us, it's something that we saw a good couple of years ago. And so we made an acquisition of a telco to expand our lines of service. So a couple of years ago, Conosco really did 2 things brilliantly: support and project delivery. We now do 6, and we acquired 2 of those, so fixed line and mobile telephony as part of that. I think one of the roles that we mustn't forget adds huge value to a client from an MSP's perspective is that if we can take on their handling of multiple vendors and become that single point of procurement and support and architectural decision making, that's the best outcome a client could possibly want, not to have to talk to 5 suppliers but 1. And so if you can position yourself in line, partner with or acquire or build the capability to be able to service unified comms, I would definitely do that. it also plays to one of our strategic ambitions, which is to maintain breadth of service delivery and offering, so that when we see downturns like this, if perhaps your support offering is taking a knock, your communications offering probably isn't. It's much more of a utility in the eyes of the client. So that would be my feedback on how to avoid it, but it is definitely a risk unless you proactively do something about it.
No, I think it's a wonderful point there, and it touches on one of the broader trends that we're seeing with consumers generally, is the move towards convenience. And if you can be that single point of contact, making their lives easier with that expertise, you know, that's a real value add that you're giving them there that they're not going to get themselves. And busy leaders need that in particular.
Can I just add a very small point to what Anders said? I think in addition to what you've said is also, this is a question that also comes up at Hallam a lot, is what can you do that they can't do themselves? That should always be your question. It doesn't matter what service you're delivering. And that, you know, what's the added value? What's the expertise? What's the trust that you can exude as part of what you present that actually makes you, they can't not use you. You know, that's the challenge that I think everybody has to face with in-housing of any service, to be honest. So I think that's a critical part of brand building that needs to be taken seriously by MSPs.
And I'm just going to read out a comment from Pamela Blanchard, who's put that she's the teleco organisation delivering UC, and key to success is 10% around UC and 90% around customer experience and being integral to your client's business. So really your sustainable, and Anders agrees with that, your sustainable competitive advantage comes from embedding yourselves in your clients' businesses. Now, I'm going to ask Julio, Roxanne and Anders for your 3 takeaway bits of advice for MSPs. If you could try to keep your answers within 1 minute or so, that'd be great. Yep. Let's see how that goes. Julio, let's kick us off.
That's not easy for me, right?
And I was speaking directly to you when I said that, Julio. So, yeah.
Got attacked. I would say uncertainty is now business as usual. That's the backdrop against which everything I'm about to say should sit. Uncertainty is business as usual. I would say my 3 pieces of advice. Number 1 is take time to figure out what's actually important. What do you do that's actually useful to your customers? What do they actually want? What does their landscape look like, not just yours? Take time to redefine that offer, that value proposition, so it's really clear. Don't be an MSP of the past. Secondly, I talked earlier about there's an opportunity for MSPs to become this engine, the central part. How do you become a trusted, critical component of business? How do you become that partner so that you don't become obsolete, that you don't get cut out? I think take the time to position your brand and to position your value around that. And the final thing is, this is a bit of a cliche, but it's true. It is going to be a new age. There is going to be a new normal, and you need to build your brand for that new age. The brand that you were in January will no longer be as relevant after this is over. So evolving is not optional anymore. I genuinely don't believe it is, and I think even if it's a small change or it's a redefining, it's essential.
Wonderful. So 3 bits from Julio: figure out what is important to your customers, become a partner to your clients, and prepare for entering into a new age. So Roxanne, I'll pose the same questions for you. 3 takeaways for potential customers.
I also find it so difficult to be quick and succinct, so I will try my best. 3 takeaways. So I think the things that are really obvious to me is that because consumer behavior has changed, the way they're interacting with media, and different kind of places that you can get in front of them has changed, where they're spending their time. Make sure that at a minimum, where you are running advertising, that you're running your advertising where your customers are spending their time. We know that's changed. There's a great idea to revisit that and make sure it aligns properly. And then as well, I know Julio just mentioned it, but think about the value proposition and what you're communicating, because we're seeing in a lot of the data that customer needs in this space might have changed. There might be new entrants into the space. They might need to be communicated with differently. So, think about in the new environment, what is the message that you actually want to be taking to market? And then are you putting that in the right place? And the third one I would say is try not to get blinded by the short term. I think we've kind of covered it in a different ways, that standing still in a time of ambiguity is kind of, inaction is the worst action that you can actually take. So think about how you're going to rebuild, think about how you're going to move forward, because agility and being able to deal with ambiguity is really key to business survival in the long term. And the businesses that do thrive and survive are the ones that take the action to protect and sustain themselves in changing circumstances. So think about what you need to do in the short term, think about where you want to get to in the long term, and have a plan for both. This is one of the reasons why we're seeing such a big surge in interest for terms like contingency plan.
Mm. That's wonderful. Thank you, Roxanne. So 3 things there. Inaction is the worst action. Pivot your value proposition and target your customers where they are now. So that's wonderful takeaways. Anders, over to you with your 3 key takeaways.
Three takeaways. The first will be on, don't forget your people in all of this. Use downtime to leverage the spare resource that you have and help them build new capabilities. So training, new service propositions, etc. I think from a service delivery perspective, my second point would be, we are seeing the blurring of the 9-to-5 day in our client base. We are seeing support and other requests for work coming in now outside of those hours more and more from within the UK. So be prepared for a workforce that may need to change rota, and that service delivery may have to now be much more stretched out across the day if you're not already 24/7. And the third one for us is just a go-to-market message that we've been banging the drum about for 2 years now, and I think is now even more relevant. And that is that a strong cybersecurity position provides your clients with a competitive advantage. And the more that you can share and promote it as being as advantageous rather than a annoying cost center for them, the better. And I think about answering RFPs, public sector, tenders, etc. Security is always up there as something that they need, and so don't forget that in the mix.
Wonderful, thank you there. So don't forget about your teammates and have a strong cybersecurity proposition. Wonderful, thank you very much for that, Anders. One last thing to briefly leave you with before we go. That is, we have got an MSP marketing hub on our website. This deck will be sent out along with this video to all participants. Take a look at some of the content there. There's a link there in that slide. I would also say, so my name's Jake Third and Julio is my colleague. We're from an agency called Hallam. We're a digital marketing agency that works with a number of MSPs on helping them to grow. So feel free to get in touch with us. Just Google Hallam Digital Agency. Just to wrap up, I'd like to say thank you very much to all of the panelists today. We've had Anders Reeves from Conosco, Roxanne Brownlee from Google, and Julio Taylor from Hallam. Thank you to everybody, all of the attendees today, and for asking some great questions. We're going to get this sent out to you afterwards. So thank you very much for your time today. Goodbye now.